First of all, it's really nice to meet you. I've been excited.
I just want to say that I'm equally excited to be chatting with you. And this is seriously my favorite part about being an author is connecting with readers. And it sounds like you're not only a young reader, you're also a young writer. So that's super cool.
What inspired you to write about the experiences of minority students?
I definitely want my stories to showcase the range and experience and beauty that is being a character of color, a person of color in the world. And growing up, I did not get a chance to read many stories that had characters and especially main characters that were people of color. And I just thought, okay, I love writing, I love reading, but there's this gap here. And I listened to advice by Toni Morrison. She said that if there's a book in the world that you want to write, but it hasn't been written yet, then you need to be the one to write it. And I thought, okay, then here I go. And it took many years, but I finally was able to do it.
Sounds awesome. How has your writing affected the way you relate to others?
We're having this conversation right now, which is really powerful, right? Like the two of us, we didn't know each other before at all. And here we are on screen engaging in this conversation because of a story that I wrote in my computer. Like I worked on it for my laptop for years until it finally saw the light of day. And now we get to meet and have a conversation because of that. I mean, that feels kind of like sci-fi or like magic or just, the fact that that can actually happen.
How have you used it to process interactions of your experiences?
For me, I didn't really have many books around my house until later. And when I say we really only had two books in my house for a while, I mean it. And those two books were the Bible and the Yellow Pages. And other than that, it was maybe a free newspaper my mom got at the supermarket or something. So books weren't really a big part of my life, but stories were. My parents were constantly sharing stories, especially my mom, like at home, in the kitchen, in the car, on the way to church, like before school, after school. She just was always telling stories. And it wasn't until third grade that I got my first book ever. There was a program at school called Reading is Fundamental, and every student got to pick out a book and keep it. And I just thought it was such a big deal. Like, I get to keep this. I get to put my name in this book. Like, this is mine. I don't have to return it. And I just got hooked on reading. And then I discovered the library, and, the rest is history, right? But what about you? I mean, what was it like for you growing up, like in terms of reading and storytelling?
Like you, my parents were always like telling stories of like their past or like what they did growing up. And I didn't really get into like reading until like middle school because I didn't really know much about reading in elementary school. I just like did what ELA class or whatever. But I remember in sixth grade, my teacher, we started reading The Book Thief and like reading that book. And I was like, wow, like this is really good. And then she started like giving me books to read, and I kept asking her for books, and that just got me into reading.
Oh, I love that. It's like one book, one student, and then that changes everything.
When you have an idea for a novel, do you ever lose motivation and want to quit writing it entirely?
Yes, that's the short answer. I definitely experienced that. This is something else that people don't often tell you. It's like when you read a book, right? You read it from the first page to the last page. Even if you take breaks, whatever, you read it in that order. But when you're writing a book, as you know, because you're a writer, you don't usually write it in that order. You might start with a scene smack in the middle of the book, or you write a scene and it doesn't even make it into the book, or you think you're writing the ending, but it's actually going to end up to be a really good beginning. And so you write it out of order and it's messy and you have all these islands and chapters and scenes and you're like, oh my God, how do I make sense of this? but then slowly it starts to gel and crystallize. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Kind of like putting together a puzzle, right? And I love that feeling, that rush when it's coming together. But for years, I didn't know that was normal, that that was just maybe the writing process. So I would start writing books or stories from what I thought was the beginning, and it would fall flat, or it wasn't interesting, or I'd get stuck. And then instead of realizing I got to take a breather, come back to it, or maybe write a scene that's taking place later in the story, I would just quit and say, like, oh, I guess it's not working. So I had a lot of false starts, a lot of failed beginnings, you could say, but all of that made me a stronger writer, kind of put some muscle in the pen, and eventually I learned that you don't have to write a book in any order. Nobody will ever know when they pick up the book, the order in which you wrote it. It's kind of cool.
So do you brain dump, or do you go like step by step? Because I know when I started writing, I would just like have these like all these ideas in my head, and I know I would forget them. So I would just like put them on paper, like no matter if it didn't make sense or not.
Yeah.
Or do you like all put them on paper, or just go step by step?
I'm a little bit in between now.
Okay.
Some people like to call it like, are you a pantser? Like you write by the seat of your pants, you just like you described. Or are you a plotter where you're like, here's my outline and I'm going to write and check off every scene. I am in the middle. Like I'll start with a rough outline. Like I think this is going to be a story about a group of American teenagers who go down to Guatemala to do community service. I think that's it. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who the characters are. I don't know how they're going to change by the end, but that gets me started. And then I start doing kind of character profiles and character interviews, and then I'll start writing scenes, and it kind of evolves from there. Like, so that's the book I'm working on right now. Will you share what you're working on right now?
I'm not currently working on anything. I was during the summer. I started writing because I like fiction and like action. And I remember I watched this movie about superheroes and like having like superpowers. And I started writing a story about two different characters and like comparing their lives, about one female who has like everything, like she's rich and like she develops a superpower. And then you have one who's like poor, and then they just develop a superpower. And it's just like how they end up meeting and like how their lives change after that. And it's like I started working on that. And
Yeah.
then I was like 2 chapters in and school started, and I was like, yeah, I'm not about to get time to do that. So I just stopped. What have your experiences as a teacher influenced your decision to write for a young audience?
So I was teaching at the Boston Teachers Union School. It's a K-8 school, and I taught 7th and 8th grade ELA. And we had an independent reading, like a classroom library. And I felt that like my students weren't always connecting with the books that were there. And it was frustrating because I knew my students were readers and they wanted to like do a deep dive into a story, right? But a lot of the books, for one reason or another, just weren't their cup of tea. And so I would sometimes think about them when I was writing my stories. And I'm like, I want to keep this interesting. I want to keep this fresh. I want to make it so that whoever's reading the book doesn't feel like, oh, miss, can I get the bath to the bathroom? Or, oh, I need to go to the nurse, because my students often did that during independent reading time. That's when I wrote Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, because many of them had never seen a book that showcased a Latina on the cover. They had never read a book set in Boston, right, in Jamaica Plain, where many of my students lived. And I just was really motivated by them. I'm just super interested in like how you found this organization and how you got connected, and like what made you gravitate towards WriteBoston.
I personally never really knew what I was good at. And then I started liking ELA throughout like the years, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm really good at writing because I'm always getting like 90s or 100s. And then I was sent an email by my assistant head of schools about this program, WriteBoston. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll take the opportunity. And I did. And I found out I was really good. And I actually enjoyed writing.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. This is your thing, you know, like writing is your thing and you found it. And it's just so great. Like you're so lucky that you have tapped into what makes you happy. And so I say, just keep doing it. Like, don't let it go, because I know this, I feel this, that one day somebody's going to pick up your book and they're going to have the feeling that you had when you picked up The Book Thief, when you felt like, I gotta read on, I can't put this down. Somebody's going to feel that way about your book, a book that you write. So keep going, keep writing. And I'm so excited for you and this whole program. I think it's amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.